But in a different context, it was something that was being sometimes put as a threat to Ukraine unity, was the fact that there is a East Ukraine and the West Ukraine, and even Mr. Putin, in the form of being a president during the Bucharest NATO summit, during the meeting Russia-NATO summit, he actually spoke about Ukraine in terms which we Poles known from the different language, different statements, as being a Saisonstadt, which actually shocked many leaders and made them think twice about Mr. Putin afterwards. However, the question remains, looking at the fragility of some of those states, is the problem of, for example, of sovereignty more important now, of social stability more important now, than the problem of democracy and transformation? This is a basic question, because how you answer to this question, it would influence the way how the European Union or the United States of America would address assistance to those countries. This is different things. And I already see some changes in the way how the Western statesmen formulate the problem, that the sovereignty of Georgia, for example, sovereignty of Ukraine, would unsolve some of the border problems with the Russian Federation, sovereignty of Moldova because of Transnistrian problem, sovereignty of Belarus, who is now going to sell under duress its industry, for example. What is more important? Ukraine answer.
For the general population?
Well, for the elites and for the general population.
Well, it's very difficult to say without reliable opinion surveys, actually. As far as I know, society is divided in this regard, more or less 50-50, or I would say one-third to one-third, and one-third is undecided.
So about what?
About what you ask, about this contradiction between stability and democracy. Because, you know, a public mood is fluctuating in these terms. Each government comes to power under slogans of stability, of reforms, but they don't deliver, and people move into the opposite direction. 1 year ago, people were very eager to have this stability, and this was the main slogan of Mr. Yanukovych and of his party. We deliver stability. Today, this stability looks like a cemetery, and nobody is satisfied. The satisfaction is growing and growing, and so it's kind of pendulum. It's very different in different points.
But do you, responding to something which Istvan have said, do you think that the leaders of the Orange Revolution, that means Yushchenko and Tymoshenko, would they behave differently in terms of relation between them and competition which took place, and the fact that they didn't deliver on the pro-European changes? Would they behave differently if there would be a clearer European perspective to the country?
Oh, definitely, yes. Of course, to say you the truth, I don't see any example of consolidation of democracy in the world without some external support. Of course, except for old democracies like United States or France. But basically, today, in today's world, all the countries consolidated democracies with some external help. And in this regard, Ukraine is not much different from countries from the Balkans. But in the Balkans, they got this stabilization agreements. They got some support from the European Union and, in some cases, from NATO. In Ukraine, we have the opposite. We have very distorting influence of the eastern neighbors. So, of course, absolutely, I fully agree.
Okay. Before I go to you would like.
Would you like to answer? I wouldn't like for Belarus to be at the margin, but there are some questions. We did have a color revolution in August 1991 up until 94. But we had a reversible revolution, and it was pronounced here that Russia did it because it sent its commissars, prime minister, and the heads of the parliament, and they gave Lukashenko his dictatorship. It was said that without help from the outside, it's difficult to make a revolution. In our case, this help from the democratic countries was counterproductive. In 1991, Lukashenko was forced to sign a declaration in Istanbul. And nothing is done in order to implement it, but the West supported him, helped him in all possible ways. There were 4 contracts. In 1996, there were 12 agreements. And then in 2004, it turned out that there are no agreements for Belarus. And it was a very big attack on our opposition. It turned out that Lukashenko is a great person. Also, the strategy of Belarus was supported also by President Kwaśniewski. In October 2008, his power was even consolidated. But fortunately, we were invited to Poland, and we said that a wolf cannot be made a vegetarian. And only this year, Radosław Sikorski said it cannot be done this way. But 3 years ago, they were eager to do this, and we had to resist it. There were so many beautiful declarations up until today, but nothing more. And I'm sure that if we do not act in an American way, they found a way for sanctions against Lukashenko. But I have to say, Europe did not find such sanctions. Very well. There is a microphone. This microphone is going to be delivered to the person who wants to take the floor. Please present yourself. If you represent an institution, you can speak English or Polish.
From the European Academy of Diplomacy. I'll try to have a more general question to our friends from Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova, because it seems that all of your countries have been for a very long time on a crossroad. You're not on a fast track in any concrete directions. It's always a crossroad that we are dealing with one way or the other. And we talk a lot about what the EU has done, hasn't done, what your countries have done, what they haven't done, about the corruption or the lack of enough progress. But I wanted to hear today something else from you. I wanted to hear your vision. What inspires you in your countries that you say, because you do say, it will get better finally? What are the major factors in Ukraine and Belarus and in Moldova that makes you sit here and say, give us a chance, and in a few years, in a decade, it will be a different country?
Thank you. Very good question. Well, let's keep it in mind. We will get a few questions. Go ahead, please. The gentleman there. Oh.
I'm Andriy Shevchenko from the Ukrainian Parliament, and
Привет.
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 And I like Mr. Ryabchuk's idea of viewing the Orange Revolution and the Moldovan changes as part of this greater change throughout Eastern Europe, starting from 1989, but the results are so different throughout the region. So I would like to explore this idea even further. There are always similarities between the countries throughout the region and the changes.
What is your answer, being member of parliament?
I'll tell you later.
No, go ahead. What is your...
Well, the thing is, I clearly see that there are plenty of similarities. The changes were driven by democratization, liberalization of the economy, and getting rid of this Russian control. But there are some things which have been done by the Poles, the Czechs, and eventually the Slovaks, but they have not been done yet by the Ukrainians, the Moldovans, and not to forget about the Belarusians. So a part of joining or not joining the European Union and NATO, what could be some other things which have not been accomplished yet by those nations? Well, I guess this question to Mr. Ryabchuk, to Mr. Shushkevich, and maybe Pan Bronislaw will tell something about this too.
Okay, so what haven't been done, what could have been done? Yes, on their own. Very good. Pan tutaj w drugim rzędzie teraz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alexander Goncharenko,
Alexander,
Strategic Studies, Ukraine. It seems to me that in our discussions we lost very, very important thing completely. Role of Russia in the region and role in Russia in the failure of the color revolutions. It's a very serious mistake. Another serious mistake that Western response to this policy is not consolidated. Part of the Western countries prefer to use so-called Russian first policy, the German, France, partly Italian. But in this case, you see, we risk to raise completely the difference between of this policy of resetting relations with Russia and policy of appeasement of Russia. Sorry, but this way. It's very dangerous for the West itself. So I'd like my new Western partners, I mean new EU members, to comment about this policy of consolidations of the Western policy toward Russia, because Russia have two foreign policies. One foreign policy is for external consumption for the rest of the world, and quite different policy for the former Soviet Union. This we have Chechnya, Georgia, Abkhazia, and recent attempt to blackmail Ukraine, not to allow it to join the free economic zones, direct blackmail. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe the last one, the lady here in the first row, pani w pierwszym rzędzie.
Thank you so much. Senior Fellow with the Atlantic Council, former member to the European Parliament.
And your name is?
Erika Mann. I had the pleasure for many years actually to chair the delegation with most of your countries. And I have 2 points. One point actually relates to the question, the dream still to become and the importance to become a member of the European Union. I wonder if in the light of the historical recent difficulties in the European Union and the changes in the global economy, if this is really still something which, is, should become a reality. I was always very much in favor, so don't get me wrong, I'm still in favor. But maybe when you look into countries which are doing perfectly well, like Turkey, without being a member, many of the EFTA countries doing extremely well, maybe it is time to reflect if it's really one of the most important urgencies. Outstanding is still the free trade agreement, and I think probably a free trade agreement and a real partnership agreement at this stage of time, it's probably more important than really to fight for the integration right now. My second question is, how do you see when you compare your situation in your countries, how do you compare it to the situation in what is called the Arab Spring or the recent rise in countries like Spain? How do you see it? Because my understanding, it's the fight in those countries is more than just for democracy. It goes much further. It's against corruption, as it was said. It's actually against the political establishment. And I wonder if you see something similar happening in your countries.
Okay, I will. Can I ask the panelists to respond, but to keep the international relations for the first part separately? We'll come back to it, to the problem of Russia and the problem of Arab Spring, broadening this. So let's concentrate first on internal development, on questions: what inspires you, and in the context of what's been very wisely put, what haven't been done, what could have been done in order to promote modernization and democratization of your countries. Let's start with Ukraine, being the biggest in the region.
First, the answer to the first question would be rather idealistic and probably pathetic. I believe I'm like all the people, so I feel that Ukraine is European country and country which has some tradition of civility and some tradition of well, maybe not democracy, but of understanding what democracy means. And basically, I see all the preconditions for democracy building in Ukraine. Much better preconditions than in many countries in the world. And of course, since my youth, I hate totalitarian system. I hate all the forms of authoritarianism. So I would fight for democracy regardless of what happens and whether we have chances or not. That's another matter. As to the question, what went wrong in Ukraine? I would say that everything went wrong since the Orange Revolution. I have the impression that Orange team did not have any master plan for reforms. I suspect that they did not believe that they would win. I have very strong suspicion about this. And of course...
But they were people of government.
Pardon?
But they were people of government. Yushchenko was the head of the National Bank. Timoshenko was in government before.
Yes, that's great surprise. But since they took power, they didn't have any vision of what should be done. So I suspect that they are just, very Soviet people who still do not have what rule of law means, and who still try to play with rules, not by rules. And this is main reason why they failed. I was asked this provocative question recently by some journalists. What would have you done if you were president? I responded semi-jokingly. I would have done three things. First of all, of course, I eliminated all the so-called law enforcement agencies in Ukraine because they are completely corrupted, starting from courts and police and of course KGB. KGB is like cancer in all these countries. You cannot reform this. Illustration is necessary. Restitution of property was necessary, and of course some sort of audit of gas and oil industry, because it never has been done. And this is another cancer. It's black hole, not only in Ukraine but also in Russia. But it's another matter. Not a single reform was done. I believe that the rules had to be changed, and they were not changed. Democracy was not established in the country as the only game in town. And
what about oligarchs?
Well,
the problem with your oligarchs was that they also could not agree on one particular policy.
Well, luckily, oligarchs in Ukraine are not homogeneous. They are divided. I would distinguish at least two groups. One of them is absolutely parasitic because they benefit from just from connections with the government only, and the other group produces something. So they have different interests. And but of course, they were not eliminated from politics. And the first signal from the Orange government. The first bad signal from the Orange government was nomination of friendly oligarchs to some ministerial positions and so on. Yushchenko did not fulfill his one of his main promises to separate business and politics. It was not separated. Friendly oligarchs occupied very important ministerial positions. It was very bad signal for the entire society, and so on and so on.
Okay. Moldova, you don't have oligarchs, do you?
I don't believe there is any society or state which does not have its own oligarchs. Speaking about the vision and what exactly unifies the democratic forces, I think that a formal answer would be full integration into the European Union. But of course, the answer has to be fragmented into many responses. The society is in full transition. That means that a part of the society is still nostalgic. We have about 10% of the population that still believe that the Soviet Union was a good thing for their lives, because they still live through their past. And this 10% is quite a lot of the population. I don't know exactly the results in the election in Ukraine about the nostalgical group segments of the population, but we have to keep in mind the other part of the coin is that there is a large group of the young population that wants to be in Europe and act as Europeans. We should not forget that we speak an official language of the European Union. Romanian Moldovan language, which is identical. That means a very important element of fortifying the path and the roads towards European Union. But instead, we have to do a lot of work, and I mentioned the insecurity. There are huge tasks to be performed by the new government in a very short period of time. We are speaking about 2 parliamentary elections since 2009. Why? Because we were unable to elect a president in Moldova, and the Speaker of the Parliament is performing the same functions. Why? Because the Constitution was a formal exercise in 1994, lack of progress in making the Constitution to work and to upgrade. And I think that speaking about the conclusions made by Bronislaw, is it a real revolution or not revolution? I think that we've passed through a kind of institutional jump, an institutional jump that provided additional temperature to the administration, to the society, but it did not change the menu, the offers, and the goods for the population. The population wants the same services from the state that it received in the Soviet Union. In the same time, the economy is 90% private. So the state cannot perform the functions that it performed in Gosplan era. And a lot of things have to happen, including the illumination of the political elites. These kind of events provide a splendid forum for the illumination of elites, to upgrade their own souls and their own understandings, how to be more helpful for the population. At the same time, speaking about the role of Russia again, because this is the invisible and very visible sometimes actor in our transitions. Well, we know the concepts of Mr.
I hope that we will talk about Russia as a separate element in just a moment.
Okay.
Okay? I won't forget. It's too important to all of us. Panie prezydencie, do pana teraz pytanie, ale bardzo specyficzne, ponieważ
I have a question to you. It's very specific because it's related to the state of awareness of the Belarusian society. The analyses that were carried out by credible centers of public opinion showed that there is a great difference between a vast majority of rural society in Belarus that goes to stability and a small elite, a truly European elite that strives for democratic changes. The Belarusian Institute Peace produced 2 analyses. In English, it's called the engine of change. There is no engine of change in Belarus. And therefore, your previous utterance, which I understand very well, that Lukashenko was supported to the detriment of the society, must be perceived in this context. That is, what is the real support for the Belarusian opposition? And after December, I can't tell, but up until December, for the last 5 or 6 years, it remained at a similar level. You are right, but you have to look at our reality. As far as the recent elections in Belarus are concerned, it's a lie. It's really difficult to understand it all, but we do not have any ways of action to make people understand and have a proper distinction of what is what. Practically, there's zero activities at this point, and it differs us from Ukraine. This is where we differ from Ukraine. And there are no political actors. We have state TV that makes our society sick. Even when the elections were lost, Lukashenko said, I have no idea how petrol became so expensive. But what he said Well, it can't be an increase of 30%, but let's say 5%. Europe does not really understands us. As far as the statistics are concerned, for the opposition, the support is to the same extent as for Lukashenko, about 25%. And during such events like elections, if Lukashenko says that they are destroying our economy, everybody goes to Lukashenko. So these were the conditions in which it's difficult to act. And as far as informational blockade is concerned, we got tremendous help. And I have to say that we can do more in foreign countries than in our country, because we don't even have any premises to gather representatives of NGOs and other organizations. Everything was taken away from us. I want it to be understandable because nobody expects from us. I have to say that nobody expects us to act in a good way. And I have to say that Mitterrand, Thatcher, and Bush said that if there are any separatist tendencies, then really nobody is going to help. It's difficult to expect something from the opposition. It doesn't have any political vision. We are not mature enough to develop a political vision. Yes, we understand where you come from and why you are saying this. But if we were to revert to the question that was posed, what could have been done and was not done, I can tell you a short story.
Directly, because it is about his predecessor here. There was a new American ambassador who came to Poland, and his name was Tom Simmons. And Tom Simmons came, and I arrived. I was at that time, I was working for the BBC World Service. I arrived from London, and I asked, where are my friends? And said, they are meeting a new ambassador. It was, I think, 1992. And I came there. Everybody was, of course, all revolutionaries in blue jeans. Some wine was around, maybe a bottle of whiskey. And during it was all very pleasant. New ambassador was interested in the Polish opposition now in power. People were interested in new ambassador. And then young man said, but you know, ambassador, we want to become members of NATO. 1992. An American ambassador said, oh, come on, guys, this is not your problem. This is not on the cards. We are not going to talk about it. And then everybody joined in. I remember Janusz Shushkevich was there, Adam Michnik was there, others were there, and said, but of course, this is what we are going to do, NATO and European Union. And he was so confused. He was upset because he didn't have it in his State Department brief when he was arriving to Poland. And do you know what did an American ambassador do? In total shock, he just left the party, because he didn't want to say even a single word which could be misunderstood. This is fascinating. He did describe it in all his fairness. We had a good laugh later on. In all his fairness, he described it in his memoirs. But why I'm saying this story? First of all, it's a wonderful story. Secondly, it says something about American relations to Central Eastern Europe. And thirdly, the bottom line is, if you are not going to do something yourself, nobody is going to do it for you. That's the bottom line. And my problem, I don't have a problem with Moldova or with Belarus especially, but I have a problem with Ukraine, I must say. And I've been traveling to these countries every few months in the last 10 years, and the opportunities missed are of a historical proportions. That's, I allow myself this. How do you see it, Istvan? Is it Russia's fault? Now let's go into Russia.
Let's go into Russia.
Yeah, Russia first, Russia policy, influence of Russia, and also Arab Spring, very important. It means a broader context of what is happening.
I don't think it's Russia's fault. Much of what Russia does is Russia's interest or Russia's perceived interest. So I think it is much more our fault. How do we deal with Russian interests and with Russian perceived interests? And we don't do it very well because we do one of two extremes. We either kiss the, how do you say it in politically correct way? What do you kiss in American politically correct? Kiss the whatever of the Russians?
Say it incorrectly.
No, I don't dare to. So we either do that, whatever. I mean, example, nothing. You should say that. So if somebody doesn't know after the session, I tell the word. Anyway, so we either try to satisfy all the Russian needs, and the best example for this, the latest one is Moldova, where we try to offer a strategic dialogue with Russia of the European Union if they are forthcoming with the Transnistria issue, which is totally wrong, because if we need a strategic dialogue with Russia, I think Transnistria should be the subject of the dialogue and not the reward for the dialogue. So if we don't need it, then don't offer it even for Transnistria. So we are trying we did it in Georgia. I think we betrayed Georgia badly in 2008 and before that, and ever since. I cannot use another word. It is not politically correct, but I think this is the word. Or we just alienate.
Are you sure you are not Polish?
No, I'm not. But I'm best friend of Poland. So. Or we alienate Russia, or I mean, with the first one, I think the real turning point was the disastrous Bucharest summit of NATO, where we delivered the message to Russia that Russia comes first, and we delivered the message to Ukraine and Belarus and to all these countries that we only care about you in the light of our relations with Russia, and I think this is the message that still is out there. And of course, the direct consequence was the war, the Russian war against Georgia. But there are much more long-term consequences. We lost, I think, the trust that we are ready to help in case of need, and it will take a lot of time and much more summits than just one to regain this trust. Or the other way is when we are doing something where we could consult Russia, where our interests coincide with Russia, or at least run in parallel, but we don't do it. My best example for this is Bosnia, where we go forward with a plan to settle the constitutional issue for Bosnia, and then we don't consult the Russians. We didn't consult the Turks either, which was even worse. But we didn't consult the Russians, so what was the Russian reaction? The normal good old Soviet reaction. We were not consulted. We do not consider this proposal on its merits, but because we were not consulted, we are against it. So they were working against it, and they achieved what they wanted with the Serbs, in the Bosnian Serbs. So I think this is our basic challenge. We should define our policies towards Russia, and then we will find that there are some issues where our interests coincide, and there are issues where we have to confront them. And where we need to confront them, we should. And the Russians will understand. But this policy, the Russians don't understand either one of the two extremes, and they don't know how to deal with it. Also because we are unpredictable. The Russians don't know what will be our reaction, one extreme or the other extreme. And I think this goes also for the others. Another example, Ukraine. I mean, we were using the excuse that the majority of the Ukrainian population didn't support NATO membership. There are some Germany experts here in the audience. The support for NATO membership, I think, at that point in Ukraine was about 30 to 34%. In 1954, when the German Federal Republic joined NATO, I think the support was 14%, 14%. So, well, there were some American troops on the soil who support. So it was, I think, the opinion poll was 14%, and it was still a good move to invite Germany. It was a game changer in the entire post-World War II. Situation. So I think we really need to be a little more serious to ourselves, and then also to the others. We deserve it too. Yeah. Russia deserves it too.
Yeah. I think that because what you've said is very often heard in Poland and in other countries. But I can tell you, I just spent 6 months in Brussels. and I'm talking about the European institutions, not about NATO. In Brussels, nobody talks Russia. Russia is totally, but utterly non-existent as a problem. This was fascinating for me. Even I had to ask specifically about this agreement made between Angela Merkel and President Medvedev when they met outside of Berlin, and they talked for 13 hours. And the proposal was actually made to set up something like European Union, Russia Security Political Council. And then Angela Merkel put Transnistria on the table. And 2 weeks later, Lavrov in Paris, when asked, have said Transnistria is a very difficult subject to solve. And so they said no, it's no go. Nobody talks Russia. Nobody talks about this Security and Political Committee. So feeling of some people that Russia somehow is at the center of Europe's attention is totally wrong. Russia is a problem. Russia is not being seen as part of the solution now. In Germany, when I've been actually researching the Neue Ostpolitik, Germans look much more to China than to Russia. And I can give you an example of that. When there was a meeting, summit meeting between the Russian and German government in Novosibirsk last year, there were 2 planes accompanying Angela Merkel. And there was almost a scandal because businessmen did not appear for the party. They stayed in the hotel. And they had to be persuaded to join Angela Merkel and the rest of the German government because they were flying actually to China, not to Russia. The exchange between European, I think it's important to say that because sometimes underestimated. Trade is the basis. But what is the trade between Germany and Russia? It's 58 billion euros, including import of gas and oil. Well, I am very pleased to inform you that exchange between Germany and Poland is 64. Poland has bigger exchange with Germany. I'm afraid to say Ukraine has 6. So it is not Russia first policy, it's Russia only policy. From that point of view, from the economic point of view. That means no country of this region has anything to offer to the biggest trading country in Europe. But politically, this is not true. Look at the involvement of German diplomacy, of Mr. Westerwelle personal, etc. This does play a role. And also, and I have a long perspective, and this is... Well, energy, absolutely. Energy is what, 25-30% from Russia, so what? You are going to have shale gas and it's going to be a game changer. You have more gas from the United States because the United States became self-sufficient. Europe is not worried about it will be a hiccup, it will be an incident, it won't be a chantage anymore, a blackmail. So take it easy. I mean, Russia has a lot of problems and therefore there is a lot of attention about the so-called modernization pact for Russia. But let's look from the international perspective. Russia is not a member of Community of Democracies, and we are pleased to hear that. However, are there any broader international, is there any broader international perspective considering also reset, Obama's reset, United States reset with Russia, which sort of balance the policy towards Russia with the policy towards the countries of Eastern Europe?
Well, this is basically an issue of this making a distinction between, so to speak, etatistic elements in international politics and sort of civil society elements in international politics. Now, I believe that if as you have correctly said, from the etatistic point of view, Russia may be outside of the bracket. The only way to achieve any change, and I presume you might have heard the Polish president at the first panel saying that there is some sort of democratic progress even in Russia, as he has said. So the only way to engage and the only way to accomplish this form of change is to get into the civil society, and actually you have mentioned this on several occasions here. Now,
but aren't we overestimating the power of civil society in those countries? When you have the elites who would rather keep the civil society in jail, like in Azerbaijan, Belarus, and other?
Well, then it's the question of finding those elements that we can actually sort of interface with, and those are people whom we call democracy advocates. Now, they may be insignificant today, they may become more prominent tomorrow, and in many countries, I use this concept of decapitated society. In many countries where society has been to an extent decapitated, you have to groom another batch of civil society leaders, of politicians, of people who will be actually whom you will be able to engage. Now, if you forget about them, then forget about making significant change.
Okay, I will have two more questions because the organizers will kill me in a moment. I would prefer to survive Roland first, and then Ambassador Kornblum.